Hey guys, this is Gary, and this time I want to talk about round-trip editing between Lightroom and Photoshop. Now, you can actually set up Lightroom to interact with any external editor, but there's some things about Lightroom and Photoshop that are pretty unique. So I'll show you how to set up Lightroom to do round-trip editing with Photoshop, and also any other image editor, but this video is specifically about Lightroom, and I'll even show you a couple Photoshop techniques that you may not be aware of. At any rate, so here we are in Lightroom. So here's, well, here's the original raw file, and here's where we're going to wind up after editing in both Photoshop and Lightroom. So basically, I want to do some things to this image in Lightroom. So it's a little dull, it's a little underexposed, so I'm going to give it some more contrast. I'm going to give it a little more exposure, a little clarity and vibrance. Okay, you know, that's pretty good. I'll open up the shadows a little bit. I'm going to find the white point right about there, which makes sense because the sky is the brightest part. Okay, and new to Lightroom 5, check it out, level. Perfect. Okay. All right, so that's all I'm going to do in Lightroom. So here's how to set up Lightroom to use an external editor. If you go to Lightroom Preferences, and then you go to External Editing. If you own Photoshop, Lightroom will most likely automatically find it. So you have and it'll show up right up here. Down in this section is where you would set up another external editor. Now, it so happens I have Photoshop Elements because I teach that. So I've got my additional external editor set to that, and basically all you do is hit the Choose button. Go find the editor you want to set up. In my case, like I said, it was Elements, and here's Elements, right? I just chose Elements, like this, and then, come on, and then hit Choose, and it chose Elements. And it's that simple. So basically, if you have Photoshop, I like to use the native PSD file, so that's what I chose. I chose the color space of Pro Photo because it's a very wide gamut color space. It basically can hold millions of colors. And I choose 16 bits as my bit depth. My resolution is 300. Now, if you use an external editor other than Photoshop, I would recommend Adobe RGB as your color space because it's a lot more widely used. And your file format, whatever. I mean, for Elements, it does support PSD. So I left it at that. Now, Elements basically can open 16-bit files, but it can't edit them. So if you're using Elements, choose 8 bits. If you're using another editor, also choose 8 bits, I suppose. And I left my resolution at 300. And that's pretty much it. So that's that. Okay, so now with this image that we just finished editing in Lightroom, it's already selected, so I'm going to go up to Photo, Edit In. I'm going to choose, all right, I could choose Edit in Adobe Photoshop CS6, and it'll open it up in CS6 as a native Photoshop file. But I want to retain as much flexibility as possible, so I'm going to choose Open as Smart Object in Photoshop, because Photoshop supports smart objects. And when I do that, here it is. But it's opened as a smart object, meaning if I double click on this layer, it's going to open up the Camera Raw editor. So now I can access most of the Lightroom editing features inside of Photoshop. I mean, how cool is that, right? There's one caveat though. Now I have Photoshop CS6. I don't have the latest version of Photoshop, which is Photoshop CC. So all of the new tools that are available in Lightroom are not going to be available to me in the Camera Raw editor. in order for those new tools, for example, the radial filter and some of the other new tools, in order for those to be available to me here, I would have to have Photoshop CC. That's the game Adobe plays. They want you to upgrade. But I don't have CC, so most of the things that I did in Lightroom I could also do in Photoshop right here. And actually, one thing I want to do, I think this reflection is a little dull, so I'm going to grab an adjustment brush. I'm going to give it more contrast, more highlights, and more clarity, and I'm going to paint on the water, just the water reflection, because I just want to bring that out a little bit. Okay. Okay, I like that better. Alright, so I'm going to hit OK. Now, Photoshop is going to update this smart object. The point is, everything I'm doing here is still non-destructive, right? Because it's a smart object. Alright, so one of the things I want to do is give this thing more detail. This is kind of a very cool Photoshop technique for detail that you may not be aware of. I mean, most people sharpen, which, okay, sharpening is okay, but check this out. Alright, so I'm going to make a copy of this image. Actually, I'm going to make two copies. So I'm going to make one copy by going Command or Control J. That gives me a copy. But I want to point something out to you. If I double click on this image, and let's say I want to desaturate it, if I hit desaturate and hit OK, alright, it's going to desaturate the image, because I told it to. However, if I turn off this layer, look at the layer below. It also was desaturated because Photoshop is working off the same file. So let me double click on this, open it up, and undo my desaturation and hit OK. Alright, so I'm going to basically, I'm going to throw out this new layer, and I'm going to do it again. But this time I'm going to right click on the layer and go New Smart Object via Copy. Now, if I double click on it, open it up, desaturate it, hit OK, watch what happens. Still going to desaturate the layer, but if I turn this layer off, you can see that the layer below is not desaturated. So basically, because I chose the command New Smart Object via Copy, it's not accessing the same raw file anymore. Alright, so these are two independent layers now, completely independent, each with their own raw editor. Alright, well, it turns out I don't want to desaturate it, so I'm going to undo all that, hit OK. Alright, I'm going to make one more copy. What I'm going to do this time is just copy it. So I can go duplicate layer, and I'm going to call this layer blur, and that'll become clear in a second. And then I'm going to go up to layer, rasterize, smart object. Now it's no longer a smart object. It's basically a native Photoshop file. Okay, so I'm going to select both of these layers and go New Group from Layers. I'm going to call this group Detail. I'm going to change the group's blending mode to Overlay. Okay, now I'm going to open up this folder, and this blur layer, I'm going to invert it by going Image, Adjustments, Invert. Okay, so I've inverted the layer, and I'm going to change its blending mode to Vivid Light. Okay, so if I close this folder, turn off this folder, you can see that there's no change. So why did I go through all that trouble? Well, here's why. This is the magic part. If I go to the blur layer and I go filter, well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to go filter, convert for smart filters, and I'm going to turn this back into a smart object. Okay, the reason that I'm doing that, the reason that I had to rasterize the original smart object is because if I had inverted that smart object, it's not a linear inversion. It would have shifted the color. So yeah, I had to do it this way. I had to rasterize the layer, taking it, you know, turning it from a raw file into a native Photoshop file, now inverting it and then making it a smart object again, so I can go filter, blur, and I'm going to choose Gaussian Blur. And let me zoom in on the grass so you can really see this. It's so cool. Alright, so see, I'm blurring the inverted image, and look at all that detail I'm getting. I mean, it's amazing, right? Here's before, here's after. Look at all that detail. Just amazing. So if I hit OK, now I've got this smart filter, which I can then adjust if I want to. So if I don't like that, if I want to, let's give it a lot of huge radius. I'm going to really overdo it just to make my point. Hit OK. Okay, now it's just bizarrely obnoxious. I went way too far. Double click on it. I can back off on it. So basically this is all non-destructive, right? So I'm going to go with a blur radius of about 10. So you might be asking, why is blurring it giving this image more detail? Well, that's because we're blurring the inverse. I mean, look at that detail. It's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to save this. Now it gets really cool. It's still saving. It's almost done. So let's go back to Lightroom, and you're going to see this image pop up in Lightroom. Any second now. It's coming, and boom, there it is. Here it's coming in. There it is, right? Here's the original raw file. Here's a new Photoshop image, and check this out. I can now subject this image to all of the editing tools in the develop module. And then if I want to, I can go photo, edit in CS6, edit original, boom, brings me right back into Photoshop, opens it up, completely intact with all its layers. Here it is. Here are all the layers. I can do more stuff, save it again, go back to Lightroom. I mean, this is incredibly powerful stuff, and if you use smart objects and layers and adjustment layers and all the stuff that's available in Photoshop for non-destructive editing, you've got this incredibly powerful non-destructive workflow. I mean, how cool is that, right? Amazing. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys that. You know, if you like this video, leave a comment below. You know, if you have any suggestions or you want to see a video on Lightroom or Photoshop, leave a comment below. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot.